more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And look, we know what week it is. It is NFL Draft Week. Plenty to discuss in the world of the NFL for the Gators. Multiple Gators will be having their name called, hopefully on Thursday night, but definitely all throughout the draft, Thursday through Saturday this week for the 2021 NFL Draft. And joining me for this episode will be Zach Goodall and Demetrius Harvey from SI All Gators. These guys also cover the NFL for SI, so we'll get the best of both worlds from these guys to preview the 2021 NFL Draft. And welcome back, guys.
Thanks
Glad
for having
to be back.
David. Oh, there we go. Interrupting each other as always.
I could have done that better. I could have went single to you guys instead of welcome guys. But yeah, here we go. Zach joining us here. Zach, you will have a busy week. You were on with our friend Steady Miguel too this week, so you'll be all around Gator Nation talking NFL draft.
Yeah, man, this is my favorite time of the year, except for doing all the work that comes with it, right? I always say it's like when it comes to college, covering Florida, like this is one of the best recruiting tools that Florida can have. As I was saying in our studio before we got this thing started, it's hard to keep track considering 16 guys from the 2020 roster are technically NFL draft prospects this year. That's wild to me. And I can't wait to see, like you were saying, maybe 9, 10 guys getting called when this thing's all said and done.
Yeah, Demetrius, man, you and I were talking beforehand, and it is, as you said, this time of year, when you cover it from a Florida angle and an NFL angle, you got plenty of storylines.
Right, you have plenty of storylines, and it gets kind of tiresome, though. At the end of the day, everybody's sort of talking about the same thing over and over again, but it is fun, because you have so many of these different types of prospects, and especially the talent that Florida is showing. It's actually a little bit more exciting this year compared to last year to talk about the Florida Gators draft prospects, and then you have the Jaguars that I cover, who obviously it's just it's a lot of work, but it is rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, so plenty to discuss here. Up to 10 Gators, I think we talked here before. 10 Gators could have their name called when it's all said and done through the 2021 NFL Draft. So we'll get into maybe all those guys before we sign off here on this episode. But before we get started, Gators Breakdown Plus, you heard the preview before the episode here. Join it for as little as $3 a month. And if you're joining us live here on YouTube, join me at 9. If you join, and part of the benefits are a Discord server. So we'll have a live watch party for the spring all access that Florida's going to do on the SEC network at 9 o'clock. So if you're watching live here, we got about an hour and a half before that gets kicked off on the SEC network. So go join Gators Breakdown Plus if you haven't done so yet. So, all right, let's get into this NFL draft preview here. Here we go. We'll start at the top. No surprise, Kyle Petz. And guys, I think the question now is just how high will he go? We know it's anywhere from probably 4 to 6 is the likely window for one Kyle Petz. And it's crazy to think about. We say 4 to 6, and look, it's because of quarterbacks. That's why he's going to quote unquote fall to 4, if you want to say that, and which kind of sounds ridiculous to say he's going to fall to 4. But look, this is I don't think going too far here. This is the best prospect the Florida Gators have ever had, and Dante Fowler may have went 3, Gerard Warren may have went 3, but that's just because that's the way those drafts worked out. Kyle Pitts is the best overall prospect the University of Florida has ever had. He may not go as high as some other Gators went in the NFL draft, but it's really just because of the quarterback love that's going to be at the top of this NFL draft.
Well, right. Like if you take how people weigh quarterbacks, right? Like Trevor Lawrence is viewed as a once in a decade quarterback, but people that aren't blindly watching him.
Yep. I think we lost Zach for a second.
Oh, I guess we lost Zach. I can sort of carry on with that. I mean, if you're thinking about Kyle Pitts and in terms of just a tight end prospect, you would normally think, obviously tight end shouldn't be necessarily going top 10, top 15. I know that you had TJ Hawkinson a couple of years ago, but this is different. He's a different beast. I think that everybody's already described him as a unicorn, including his tight ends coach, Tim Brewster. So you have to look at it in terms of overall talent. So a guy that is someone who's special, he can be basically a wide receiver. Some people were even saying that he is the best receiver prospect in this draft class, above a Jamar Chase, above a Waddle, above a Devontae Smith, just all of these guys who are premier pass catchers, and Kyle Pitts is right up there with them. So it's just interesting to see how high this guy can go. I think that 4 is definitely his probably his ceiling, but only because of the quarterbacks. Like you said, I think that if a team was picking number 2 overall, they couldn't move for whatever reason, I could completely see him going in that number 2 slot, which would be completely crazy when you think about it for a tight end.
Yeah, Zach, go ahead and hop back in, man.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah. I think the last thing we heard was you started with Trevor Lawrence up there at the top.
Yeah, so like you look at Trevor Lawrence, you certainly look at, Zach Wilson, who I don't think is the second best quarterback in the class, but that's another topic. The Justin Fields of the class, and like you put him in a vacuum and you compare him with Kyle Pitts and his strengths and weaknesses, and all of a sudden, like there's a very, very serious argument that Kyle Pitts is the best prospect in this class, head to head with a once in a decade quarterback. And that's absurd. I mean, that's especially absurd to think about, like Demetrius said, at tight end. You might hear it once in a while of a receiver who's good enough to go number 1, but you certainly never hear about it at tight end. And that's wild. Like in 10 years from now, Trevor Lawrence might be winning Super Bowls in Jacksonville and on his way to a Hall of Fame career. And like, you can very reasonably say that Kyle Pitts has a competition with him for best prospect in this class. That's wild. And that's a testament to what Dan Mullen and Tim Brewster, Larry Scott were able to get out of him. Yeah,
I mean, you coming from, I think you saw the potential as he was a recruit. I remember having Brett Ciancia on. He does Pick Six previews, and I had him on the podcast, and he's from up in that area. He's like, "Look, I'm telling you, this guy's the real deal. He's going to be what you guys want him to be." I still don't think we could envision what we saw from Kyle Trask in 2020 to be what we ended up getting from him and the weapon that he was. But man, he brought it week in and week out when he was on the field, and just a matchup nightmare. And I look, whether you love him or hate him, Mel Kiper raves about Kyle Pitts, calling him one of the best prospects he's ever scouted. So, love him or hate him, there's still a lot of respect coming from one Mel Kiper there. And look, I was looking at NFL.com and look kind of some of their top strengths and weaknesses of some of these players here. And I really love this one, guys. It's a challenging matchup who might require specialty defenders. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's going to, we're going to create some kind of position on defense that can guard Kyle Pitts, even if it's possible. But when you have NFL scouts saying it's going to be a specialty defender, I mean, what does that even mean? We know he's too big for corners. We know he's too fast for safeties. Forget about linebackers. So, I mean, It's just what does the specialty defender look like if you're going to stop Kyle Pitts, if he's who we think he can be?
Yeah, I did. With covering Florida, my time where I started doing that, I did about a year away from the NFL. So maybe I'm behind on a couple of guys that could be capable. But Demetrius, you'll know more than me. Like, can you think of 5 players in the NFL that reasonably could take Kyle Pitts one-on-one? Like Derwin James, Jalen Ramsey are 2 that come to mind. Because even Jalen being a corner, like he's so long and physical and athletic, it's like people want Isaiah Simmons to be that player if he ever develops into that jack of all trades type of linebacker safety type of thing. But like, these guys don't grow on trees. There's not going to be more than a handful of players that could win a couple of reps one-on-one against Kyle Pitts, much less shut him down. I don't think that's ever really going to happen without more than one player at a time. But you're not going to find many guys that can even take his fair share of one-on-one reps against Pitts, if that makes sense, which is just, it's another reason as to what makes him such an absurdly good prospect.
No, it's crazy when you think about it. And like you said, I'm not sure I can think of 5 off the top of my head. If I went through all the rosters, I could probably name you a few guys who are at least supreme players and premier cornerbacks or safeties in the NFL who would be able to at least match up with Kyle Pitts. I understand, obviously he's an incredible talent, but there's going to be at least a couple times when he loses his battle, and that's okay. And that's not going to be an indictment on him. That's just how the NFL goes. It's a different league. Like you said, an Isaiah Simmons type of player, not saying that he's a guy that's going to be able to cover him right away, because he's certainly not. But when you have those type of athletes out there at linebacker, at safety, who can run into 4.4s, you see these new age players coming into the NFL, and you can see how they could match up with a guy like Kyle Pitts or a guy like Kittle out of San Francisco. So, the NFL is slowly adapting, but there's a reason why you see Kelsey and Kittle dominating all the time. They haven't figured it out. So now you have another guy in Kyle Pitts coming in who's essentially in that mold, in my opinion. I think that he has the capability to be just as good, if not better, than both of those players. So it's going to be interesting to see what the NFL continues to do. But for now, I think bracketing and, getting creative on defense is the only shot you got.
Guys, before we move on from Pitts, of course, the one knock, especially rival troll fans like to throw out there, he can't block. He can't block. Can he get better? Of course. I mean, he's not the perfect. He's not a 10 out of 10 if you want to go every little attribute of Kyle Pitts. He's not going to rank a 10 out of 10 on every little attribute. But let's not sit here and act like he's god awful at blocking. I mean, he puts in the effort. That's probably step one that NFL teams will love. And yeah, he can grow into that. But I've also said, if it gets to the point to where that is an issue, he's still going to be a very valuable NFL player. Kind of to go back to Demetrius' points earlier. A lot of people still view him as the best receiver in the draft, no matter if he's a wide receiver or a tight end. So if the blocking doesn't get better, if he can't line up on inline as a tight end, he's still going to bring a whole lot of as an NFL prospect.
Absolutely. He's going to bring everything pretty much. I mean, he's a guy that you want to see on the field in any position. He can play outside, inside. I do agree with you. His blocking has been probably the only thing that people have been able to knock on him. And I think that the reason why they do that is because, he's so good at everything else that you kind of have to look at something. You have to be like, I think it's sort of human nature to find a weakness in everything. So if you're going to look at something, I guess his blocking is one of the negatives, but even then, like you said, it wasn't that bad last year at all. If anything, it was pretty good. I think there was at least a few clips out there where you can see him just road grading people. So I think it'll be interesting to see what the GMs actually think of him as a complete package. But like you said, he can just pretty much do anything.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, I understand he likes the tight end label. He said it in his pro day that he's planning on playing tight end but moving around the offense. It was a creative way of saying that teams like him to do some receiver stuff, right? But that's the thing is like,
Zach, he wanted that Mackey, man. He wanted the Mackey.
Yeah, exactly. He did want the Mackey. But he's 6'6". He's got the longest wingspan in history among tight ends. He runs 4.44. I don't care if he's the worst blocker in the world.
Exactly.
I still think that's what he offers in offense beyond blocking is top 10 pick worthy 10 times out of 10. And yeah, Demetrius, there are clips of him out there blocking pretty well. He's 20 years old. He's again, wingspan, extremely long, and he can definitely add more to it if that's what his team would like to do. With that being said, he can absolutely still grow as a blocker. He doesn't need to put on 15 pounds and become a true inline tight end. That'd be a waste of his skill set, but it would absolutely not hurt to throw on 5 pounds, spend a preseason with him, just strictly focusing on blocking and seeing by like year 3, he's as well-rounded as he can be as a receiver, and he's still adding as a blocker. Like, that's totally reasonable to expect that at his age and what he has to offer, he can get better.
Well, I will say they should not turn him into Mercedes Lewis. That's the only thing that they have to make sure they do in the NFL is to not make him a Mercedes Lewis. But you're exactly right, Zach.
All right, guys. Ultimately, I think we probably not past 6 to the Dolphins there, as long as no crazy trades happen there up in the top 10 of the NFL draft. I mean, I think just something crazy would have to happen like that. Teams would have to start trading up and going quarterback crazy or something like that. But just the love we hear of Kyle Pitts, there's really no way he falls out of Atlanta, Miami with both of them there if they stay there, willing to get those type of playmakers for their teams.
I can't imagine it. And like, he's gotten really no talk to Cincinnati. It seems like it's 4-6. But if for some reason he's there at 4, I'm taking him over Chase and probably not Sewell. I guess if I'm the Bengals, they need that offensive line help. But if I'm taking a skill player, like, I'm definitely taking him over Chase. I've seen mocks even today where he's like slipping down to 9, 10.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
I can't see that.
It's not happening. It's just not happening. Jerry Jones, no matter what he's trying to influence, he's not falling to 10. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I can't see
at that
happening.
point, you're telling me, there'll be 8, 9 teams that, somebody eventually is going to have to draft based on best player available and not need. And it's going to happen before then. So Kyle Pitts is going to get selected before then.
Easily.
Exactly. I mean, and the thing is, even if he does somehow, some way slip a little bit beyond 6, then there are teams that are going to be trying to trade up for him. He's not going to get past. I can't imagine him getting past around 7. Like, it just wouldn't make sense to me. At that point, once he gets past the Bengals, everybody's going to be calling to trade up for him. People will probably already be calling to trade up for him if he gets past number 4. So it just wouldn't make sense to me.
All right, guys, let's move on to the player who probably had the biggest jump for the Gators from 2019 to 2020. If you would have asked anybody, Kadarius Toney would have been talked about as a first-round pick going into the 2021 NFL draft. He probably would have been laughed at. So he makes a huge jump from 2019 to 2020, improves so much as a route runner, dependability on the field, making big plays, catching balls down the field, still taking those handoffs, those reverses, becoming a versatile player, but still showing so much more as a wide receiver than many expected from 2019 to 2020. Of course, he had a bit of an injury bug in 2019, came back strong from that in 2020 as well. But perhaps nobody with such a big jump for Kadarius Toney. Nobody predicted that, and here he is being mocked. Now, lately, a couple out there in the top 20 of the NFL draft. So big surprise there for one Kadarius Toney.
Yeah, I guess because you mentioned it, I was over on Stadium and Gale a little bit ago. Today is the day that I air my dirty laundry. Count me in. I was not one of the people that thought Kadarius Toney would make this meteoric jump that he has. Demetrius can verify this. Like, last offseason, he had kind of done that hinting at the Orange Bowl, right? Like, that even though he was injured, he had the tape to declare if he wanted to. And I thought, you know what, if you're going to declare, man, declare as a running back and like find a way to get 5 touches a game out of the backfield, because that's your future at this point. He hadn't shown me anything as a receiver beyond catching screen passes and stuff. And then he goes and does this. And then Demetrius can verify, like, I didn't think he was going to run a 4.38 in his pro day whatsoever. I never thought that he had that type of long speed. I didn't see it on tape. I saw him just constantly being as elusive, like the jaw-dropping, elusive breaking tackles, not so much the long speed. So he comes out and he runs a 4.38, and suddenly, like, he's got more of a ceiling than I think anyone could even imagine at this point. Like, which is crazy because it feels like it's never ending. It's just never going to stop getting higher and higher, right? Like, he's running a 4.38, and we're talking about he only developed as an underneath route runner last year and like maybe intermediate. You can develop his long routes here. You can turn him into a deep threat over his first year or two in the NFL with that type of speed, with that type of explosion that he showed throughout pro day. The sky's the limit for him. And I don't know like how long you can say that about someone, but it seems like the sky is going to continue to be the limit for Kadarius Toney for some time with just all the freakish stuff that he can do on his own.
Yeah, and the thing is, Zach, you did say, before I started covering the Gators, you were like, yeah, this guy Kadarius Toney, he's probably more of a gadget player. He's probably a running back, sort of in the NFL. He probably wouldn't have been drafted last year if he came out. And I took a look at him, and I was like, yeah, he's probably right. The guy just wasn't doing much because he was injured, and plus the way that they used him, it didn't look like he could really run any routes at all. This year, he improved greatly. He superseded all of my expectations to a point where I was looking at Zach like, are you sure you saw the right thing? Maybe we both were missing something here. But, I think that it's just a credit to his hard work and development. Obviously, he still has a lot of room to grow. People will say, obviously he has improved on his route running, which he has. But if you take a little bit deeper dive of a look at him, you can see the improvements that he still does need to have to make. Like, he has to be able to run deeper routes. He has to be able to make more precise intermediate routes. The underneath stuff is great, but he still has a lot of room to grow. But otherwise, I mean, this guy is definitely the sky's the limit, like Zach said. He's a guy who can run a blazing 4.38 40-yard dash. The only time that I thought that I saw that sort of speed, I think it was last year in the Orange Bowl where he just outran Miami's defense. But other than that, you didn't really see too many times where he was just burning defenses. So you were kind of confused on what sort of speed he was going to bring because he was such a wiggly player horizontal. But I think he can be a vertical threat for any team. And I think that starting out in the slot and being developed by a great wide receiver coach in the NFL could do him justice.
Yeah, and that's it. Is like, it's not necessarily there on tape, right? But 4.38 40-yard dash is 90th percentile among receivers. His 10-yard split was 1.54. That's 66th. 20-yard is 86th percentile. His three-cone was above average in the 65th percentile. His jumps were in the 89th and 98th. Like, he came up above average or at the top for his position in like all of the important tests. So if there's anything that we don't see on tape, there's reason to believe an NFL coach is still going to find a way to get something out of him. Like, it's an amazing trajectory. It's like Dogecoin over the past couple of weeks. I guess until this recent stumble, but like, it's meteoric rise when it got up to 47 cents. Like, that's Kadarius Toney.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I think if you go to somewhere in the NFL where he's on a team that gets into the red zone a lot, he's going to be that guy, or a guy who it's 3rd and 4 and you need that first down. He's the guy they're going to be looking for up until he gets that, deeper route running underneath his wing. Because I think he has room to get there. I think the thing to remember about that is he was a quarterback in high school. He didn't start playing receiver. He didn't start lining up out there until he, was under Jim McElwain in 2017. And, still kind of just sprinkled here and there. As we said, battled some injuries in 2019, but still kind of sprinkled here and there. As you guys mentioned, the gadget player, the screen player, maybe taking a wildcat or a handoff every now and then. But then, now getting that year under Billy Gonzalez where Florida didn't really have much of a choice. I mean, you had Freddie Swain, Tyree Cleveland, Van Jefferson, all those guys leaving. Yep. Florida needed a receiver to step up. And now you found a guy you were able, the availability was there with all those guys leaving. They needed somebody to step up, and I think that's more of a credit to him. Maybe he was overshadowed a bit by those other guys. They were more polished. They were older. They had been playing wide receiver throughout high school and college. He finally gets that year where, all right, now it's my time. I've had another year, albeit a pandemic year, but a year under Billy Gonzalez to where the reputation of Gonzalez. And we're looking at the receivers like I drafted a year ago. It's kind of you kind of can see why. Maybe looking back at it, maybe not the production he ultimately got, but definitely a step ahead of what we're used to seeing Kadarius Toney, and he shattered that.
Yeah, I think that makes it even more impressive. You mentioned the pandemic year. Who would have expected this last offseason, or I guess last January, entering his senior year alone, like with the idea that he was going to have a normal spring camp and a normal offseason? Like, no one in the world was thinking KT was going to pop off and lead UF in receiving yards like he did. And it is the sky's the limit. Like, I don't even know if there's another way to put it. Any doubt that I have or have had about KT, it just gets erased at every step of the way, and there's no reason to think that that won't continue to happen.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, everybody was looking towards Jacob Copeland or Trayvon Grimes even to become the number one receiver in 2020. I'm not quite sure also if anybody really expected KT to do what he did last year. I do know that, Kyle Pitts obviously was a guy that everybody circled and said, watch out for this guy again. And he showed off, but KT came out of nowhere seemingly, and he showed out great. I mean, he was their number one wide receiver. I think that if anything, it showed, what sort of effort he was able to put in during that COVID year. Obviously there was no spring, there was no practicing. Basically you went into fall camp with fresh legs or rusty legs, if you really want to put it like that. And he was able to do it from week one. So it's a credit to him. And I think that he's going to be drafted, around that first or late first, early second round. And that's just, it's crazy to think about just a year later.
David, I think you're muted.
Oh, yep. I muted myself there. Hey, that's the first time that's happened. All these episodes, that's the first time that's happened. There we go.
It's the first time for everything.
Yeah. So, Demetrius, you said late first round, early second. Zach, do you have him first, second round?
For KT, I've got him
Yeah.
first. I put out I did a full 2-round mock, and I drafted his every team, and the way the board fell, I really liked him falling to Indianapolis in the simulation that I did. First round, 21st overall. I think that's ideally the range. Like, it starts with Washington at 19. They're in need of receiver help beyond what Terry McLaurin can do, because he can do just about everything. Like, a KT would be a perfect complement to a guy like him. And then you've got teams like Indianapolis. Tennessee needs another number 2. Definitely the guy that can do more short field stuff, because A.J. Brown can extend the field. Jacksonville, I guess, is a sleeper team at 25, given the ties to Florida with Urban especially, and just giving Trevor all the help he needs. Right there in that 19 to 25, 27, 28 range, there are a lot of teams that need a receiver, and there's going to be a big run on receivers. And I think that he's the perfect candidate, especially with this testing. Like, his testing comes in above guys like Rashad Bateman, comes in above guys like Terrace Marshall. His numbers were better than a lot of these mid to late first round receivers. So even though on tape teams might like those guys a bit better, they'll see the ceiling that Toney has, and in which case I just can't see him falling out of the first round.
Like I said, it feels like he's got room to grow there, just only playing receivers since his time at Florida there. So a lot of room to grow for Kadarius Toney. So, all right, let's move to quarterback and Kyle Trask. And I think where we go there, guys, is he a first round? Is he a second round? How did he fall behind some of these other quarterbacks that you're coming through now? And you're seeing Trask fall a bit. And so, of course, compared to a Mac Jones, where everybody kind of just thought maybe going into the SEC championship where you were looking at Heisman odds, and even if you were looking at NFL mock drafts and NFL talk, it would be these guys, Mac Jones, and everything that he's done was able to be talked up and brought him into a maybe top 5 pick here, and Kyle Trask maybe even just falling a bit more. So I think the talk is, with Kadarius or with Kyle Pitts, it was, okay, where's he going to go in the top 10? And for somebody like Kyle Trask, will he even go first round now? So it's kind of amazing with his production and with who he had around him, the two guys we just discussed here, that the talk of Kyle Trask may be now the storyline of him just falling out of the first round.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it's going to be a real shame when he falls out of maybe the second. I can't think of many teams that, because there's going to be that big run on quarterbacks and big run on skill players. There's going to be a lot of teams trying to fill other needs beyond quarterback in the second round. That's going to be a sweet spot for a lot of edge rushers, offensive linemen. We might start finally seeing some running backs, more defensive linemen go off the board, to the point where I don't know how many teams are going to be looking for a quarterback at that point, right? And I say it would be a shame for Kyle to fall out of the second, and honestly falling out of the first, because you can't not specifically compare it to the rise that Mac Jones has made. Two guys similar in terms of less than 2 years of starting experience. I think, Trask edges Jones out a little bit there, but generally speaking, it's close to the same. Similar skill sets where they're not the most athletic guys. They don't have the biggest arms, but they're considered, smart. They've got it between the ears. Mac Jones with the best offense or best team maybe in college football history, helping him, propping him up the board. Kyle Trask is down here. It just doesn't make much sense to me. What is this drastic difference when Jones and Trask have very similar strengths, and Jones had a way better football team around him, even though Trask had talent? Obviously, we just talked about 2 first-round skill players, but Jones had an elite team in every facet, in every which way or form. What is this drastic difference then between him and Kyle Trask that makes Jones a potential top 5 pick and that makes Trask a 2nd to 3rd round pick? It doesn't make much sense to me, but it seems like the mistake that teams are going to make.
I'm with you.
Going Zach's part there. I mean, look, Mac had one of the great offensive lines in college football, something Trask didn't have. Look, we could talk about the weapons. Yeah, both guys had weapons, but the difference is the great offensive line he had, and then a running game that he had to go along to help take some pressure off of him.
And
exactly.
a better defense. Although Alabama's defense wasn't great, that's just even more stress taken off Mac's back.
The thing is, it makes sense, and I do agree with you guys. Obviously, Mac Jones had plenty of talent surrounding him. If anything, if he would have failed, it would have been probably more glaring than for him to succeed as being so good, I guess you could say. It's one of those things where Mac Jones came in and he performed and to the best of his ability and the ability that everybody would expect when you have all of those players around him. But at the same time, when you do look at Kyle Trask, and I do agree that it's a shame that they're not being compared closely. Obviously Mac Jones is a potential top 3 pick, which nobody would have seen. And then Kyle Trask is a potential, 3rd round pick. But, I could sort of see him going in the 2nd round. But either way, it does make sense in terms of his placement. I think Kyle Trask placement because of where he is in terms of his ceiling within an NFL offense. I do think that he has plenty of limitations, especially his pocket movement or his mobility in order to escape the pocket. I think that that's coveted in the NFL, but at the same time, Mac Jones does have some of those limitations too. So I think that it's more of Mac Jones is graded too highly than sort of Kyle Trask is graded too low. But I do think that those sort of gaps should be closing a little bit more. I think Kyle Trask is a fine quarterback. I think that he will make a good, maybe starter down the line. I think that initially he's going to enter as a backup quarterback, which is fine. And I think that at the end of the day, Mac Jones is going to be the guy that if he's put into a perfect offense as he was with Alabama, then he could thrive just the same as maybe Kyle Trask could.
Guys, every question I have for him as a passer, he answered in 2020. It was, could his ball placement get better? And it did. Can he throw the ball down the field with a little bit better accuracy, better touch? And he did that too. So what does he bring to an NFL team in your guys' eyes? Because look, he's not the athletic quarterback of a Joe Burrow from last year, a Trevor Lawrence, and a Justin Fields from this year. Look, we know Demetrius just said he's not the athletic type, but maybe he gets into a system to where they can build around him, because he probably is going to need a little more help than some of those other quarterbacks that you have really, really high up in your quarterback rankings. But, you give him time to throw. I think he can be a pretty productive NFL quarterback.
And that's just the thing is, yes, he's not the most athletic quarterback, but you were mentioning things that he got better at from year 1 to year 2, right? One of those things was moving in the pocket, being more nimble, finding little ways, just the little things to avoid pressure and make a throw with pressure in your face compared to taking a sack, which he took way more of in 2019 compared to 2020. This suggests that he is also still getting better, like Kadarius Toney, but in his very obviously unique own way, where Kyle was a backup for nearly 7 years and is now really only had 1 full season as a starter. So yes, he still can get better. I don't think physically it's going to happen much. He's 23 years old. He's not magically just going to shave 0.2 or 0.3 seconds off his 40, and he's not magically going to put, another 10 yards on his deep ball or another, 5 to 10 miles per hour in velocity on his deep ball. You know what I mean? He's not going to necessarily become more dynamic but there are things that he can still continue to improve and has shown the capability from one year to the next that he's able to improve. And that's important. That's what teams are looking for in quarterbacks. And maybe that's why he's being slept on, is because he's the older guy of the bunch. He didn't show that in 7 years as a backup. That is just kind of going over people's heads. Like, people are thinking Trevor Lawrence has so much potential, as good as he is, that he could still get better. Justin Fields can still get better as this ridiculous athlete with a cannon of an arm. Kyle Trask may not still get better in ways that like everyone sees very easily to the naked eye, but he can still get better and offer a team, at bare minimum, someone that's going to come in and have an understanding of how to operate their offense efficiently. And if that gets him a role as a backup for 5 years, he spot starts, he eventually takes over as a starter, maybe one place. I still consider that to be a pretty successful career. And I think that it's a role he could thrive in, and he's the type of dude that makes the most of it too.
Absolutely. I think that the biggest thing to take away is I feel as though everybody sort of criticizes the term game manager, and I understand why that term can come off as negative, but I really think that that's what Kyle Trask is. He's a very good game managing quarterback, in that he's not necessarily going to make you lose. But I also, on the flip side of that, don't really see all of the traits to make him transcend an offense. When you have players that aren't available, I mean, take a look at the Oklahoma game. Obviously, there are plenty of players out, brand new kind of offense sort of that they were running during that game. I know it's not fair to criticize him based on that, but you can see the limitations that he could have if he doesn't have things going right, if the offense isn't gelling as it should be, as it typically would in a Dan Mullet offense. The same thing can happen all the time in the NFL. A player can go down. You have to make adjustments on the fly. Kyle Trask comes in there and he might not be able to operate that offense as efficiently. But I do think that he's going to be able to come in with things going well, and he's going to be able to operate an offense to the best of his ability. And I think that that's sort of the traits that NFL coaches are looking for, a guy that can come in just in case, the starting quarterback goes down, and then he can come in and maybe earn some spot starts down the line. And like Zach said, maybe several years down the line, he can develop into a starting quarterback.
All right, there we go for Kyle Trask, because we have a bit more of these prospects to go through here. But that's it for basically the three main headlines there: Petz, Toney, Trask, all guys with potential going into the first round. We expect two of them to absolutely go into the first round. Toney may be on the edge there of a first round, second round, and then we'll see where Kyle Trask ends up, hopefully with his name called Thursday night. But if not, maybe on Friday night. So here we go, moving forward. And another player with a maybe meteoric rise, but maybe at not the level of Kadarius Toney, is offensive tackle Stone Forsythe. And we just talked about Kyle Trask and how much he had to move around. And you saw on that right side, at least the pressure came from his right side to where he could see it, because we know how ugly it got there at times. And look, the reason the offense was still at elite levels at times was because Kyle Trask did not have to worry about his blind side. That was taken care of by one Stone Forsythe here. And look, guys, I mean, looking at just the Florida team and the Florida offense in general, we had every right to bash the offensive line and the production of the offensive line. But heading into 2020, not sure. I think we all thought that the Florida run game might get a bit better than it did from 2019 to 2020. It didn't. It leads to Florida throwing the ball almost every down, and even with that, limiting in sacks by Stone Forsythe here. And a lot of teams took notice. I mean, he was at Pro Day, and I know a lot of teams that raved about what he showed at Pro Day, what he showed on film. And I mean, a lot of talk of Stone Forsythe shooting up draft boards now and being a legit threat at left tackle for some teams.
Yeah, I personally love Stone Forsythe. I think that what he showed last year, especially when you look at that 2019 tape, it was sort of night and day in terms of what he can bring to the table. Obviously, being the blindside blocker for a Florida offense, that especially last year's offense, they passed nearly every play. It seemed like being that guy who had to basically be on an island for the majority of the season, and for him to perform at the level that he did, I think that it just shows how much he worked, how hard he worked. Obviously his size, at one point he was listed at 6'9", which made me and Zach scratch our heads, but he later clarified that he was indeed 6'8". He didn't grow 3 inches randomly in the offseason, but he still grew a little bit, which is crazy to think about. And I think that he is a prototypical left tackle pass blocking guy, and he even admits it. He needs to get a little better at run blocking. That's something that he's going to be working hard on as he gets into the NFL. I'm sure that teams are going to be considering that when they're selecting him. But you're right, David. He did go on a meteoric rise, it seems as though, because after the season, immediately I would have said maybe in the 5th round, maybe somewhere around that range. But now we're starting to see that he could go in that 2nd round or that 3rd round. And I think that that's just a credit to what he's shown on tape and probably his interviews and just everything that has this draft process making players move up and down the draft boards.
And Zach, he's coming along at the perfect time. I mean, these are NFL teams that are going to be throwing the ball just as much as Florida did. They're going to be throwing the ball 40 times a game. They're going to be asking their left tackle to do this.
Yeah, exactly. I mentioned my mock draft earlier that I did the full 2 round. I'm taking those picks as they are Gators as well as Buccaneers, because I also cover the Buccaneers, as they are related to those teams, and doing team-specific 7-round mocks. So I'm going to drop a little bit of a sneak peek into my Gators one, which is dropping on Tuesday. I have Forsyth going a pick ahead of Trask. I've got him as the 3rd Gator off the board because of his rise. I've got him going to the Ravens in the 3rd round. And
before you go further, the prospect grade from NFL.com for Stone Forsyth, 6.27. For Kyle Trask, 6.19. So even as an overall prospect, NFL.com has Stone Forsyth higher than Kyle Trask.
And I believe on Zerline's grading scale, 6.27 is like they project that guy will become a starter at some point, if I remember correctly.
Yep, good backup who could become starter.
Yeah, that's the hype's there for Stone. It's really building up. I mean, like you guys were saying, he is exactly what the modern NFL offensive tackle is turning into, right? As the league is becoming more pass heavy, they're looking for guys with length that can combat long pass rushers. They're looking for guys with athleticism that can combat speed rushers. A lot of the times you'll find rushers, these 6'5", 260-pound guys with absurd 40s and 3 cones rushing the edge that are just these freak athletes. You need someone big and fast, maybe not as much of a mauling run blocker with elite lower body strength, but you got to get someone that can mirror that footwork, get a good jab in, and throw them off of their speed rush. That's all Stone Forsyth did over the past year and a half. It took him some time to get comfortable when he took over that starting role from Martez Ivey, as it would have taken anyone on what was, generally speaking, a lackluster offensive line. And
a big shift in offensive philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. You gave him, I think it was like 6 games, and then from there on out, I don't think he allowed a sack for the maybe 1 sack for the remainder of the 2019 season. Then he comes in and he allows 2 all of 2020 against Alabama and against Georgia, allowing 0 in arguably their 2 biggest tests defensively in terms of a defense facing Florida's offense all season. Stone allows 0 sacks and 3 pressures in those games. So he not only came to play, but he came to play against top competition and shut them down. Like, this type of build, this type of profile, this type of tape against top competition, Stone's a sleeper. He's a guy that, people weren't talking about him a year ago because everyone was talking about Penei Sewell, Christian Darrisaw, and Samuel Cosme definitely had some hype from Texas. And he wasn't a guy that was getting as much hype, but this is truly the project modern offensive tackle that teams are starting to look for. And I like that exact description from NFL.com. Good backup that should become a starter. I think he's immediately a team swing tackle. A year or 2 from now, he should be starting.
Absolutely. I think that the guy is sort of rising at the right time. I think that you have these NFL offensive tackles that are sort of dropping out. There's players that are retiring. I mean, obviously, Marcus Gilbert is the most recent one who retired today, a former Gator. There's just plenty of room for him to be selected somewhere. Some team's going to have to find a guy, at least as a developmental guy. I even have him as somebody as the Jaguars could take. Later on in the draft, they have a definite need for a swing tackle type of guy. And I think Stone has proven, he's able to go on the right side whenever they did that last year. So I think that if a team wanted to get a swing tackle who could maybe develop into a starting left tackle, Stone Forsythe is definitely your guy.
Yeah, good point there, showing that versatility last year at Florida, and then hopefully translating that to the NFL to be on a roster for some years to come here. All right, let's move forward a little bit, and probably one of definitely the biggest, besides the stars, the biggest storyline coming out of Florida Pro Day is Marco Wilson's testing, and comparing that with Marco Wilson's 2020 season. So, of course, that raises a lot of questions: is how much does Marco Wilson's Pro Day help him in getting drafted for the NFL? Look, I know he ticked off a lot of Gator fans with his play. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. It was bad. He's going to get drafted. Marco Wilson's going to get drafted. Some team is going to draft Marco Wilson, so go ahead and prepare for it. Whether you agree with it or not, it's going to happen. Guys, how much should teams value what we saw on Pro Day versus what we saw the 2020 season?
Well, the most important thing is trusting the tape, right? I think it always does come back to it, but you can't help but be intrigued by this. And you see why teams do fall for the athlete over the tape sometimes when they have concerns about guys with their tape or with their athleticism, I guess I should say. Marco Wilson, beyond his 20-yard shuttle, tested in the top 20% of all cornerbacks ever recorded at combines or pro days in every athletic test that he did. The vertical and broad jump, he finished in the top 2% of corners of all time. The vertical jump, I believe, was the biggest of all time among corners. I'm just looking at the percentile, I think that's right, the way they list it. It's the 40-yard dash was in the 92nd. Like, he is an elite caliber athlete. And those guys, as bad as they might be on tape, chances are teams are going to take a chance on them. And Marco stepping up as the fourth corner in UF history to start day one as a freshman. That might be enough pedigree. A brother that played in the NFL plus his athleticism, that might be enough for a team to say, you know what, I see that 2020 tape. I don't even want to think about it. I want to get him with my cornerbacks coach. I want to give him a year, maybe on our practice squad or maybe just inactive on game days, but he's learning our system, molding that type of athlete into a corner that works for their team and refreshing his mindset. Teams are going to take a chance on that. A lot of teams are going to take a chance on that type of player.
Yeah,
Demetrius,
absolutely.
Before you jump in there, and Zach brought it up, he started in 2017, played really well as a freshman, got hurt in 2018, came back from a knee injury, filled in at nickel when Florida needed him to, and played pretty well. So that's why we thought there was so much promise in 2020, was because, look, he filled in at nickel in 2019, played pretty well there at that position. He's going to have an offseason to prepare for that position, and for whatever reason, it did not translate in 2020.
I think that there's plenty of reasons why it didn't translate last year. I think that obviously, first of all, his own play, maybe he was a little hard on himself at times, but you got to look at the things that were surrounding him. The safety position was a definite weakness. The rest of the cornerback group besides Kyrie Elam was a weakness. It was a lot of shifting. There was a lot of new COVID. There was just so much being stacked up against him. And I know that that's not necessarily an excuse for poor play all the time, but at the end of the day, you could see those traits, like you were saying, David, in his freshman season, and then obviously in his redshirt sophomore or junior season, whichever way you want to say it. Those years where he did show those traits, show those abilities that he has, and then when you look at that in terms of his pro day numbers, you can sort of see the athlete, just the pure athlete that he has shown. And I have to say, a lot of these NFL coaches are very arrogant, I guess you could say, or prideful in that they will see a guy that has maybe, the stats that he showed at his pro day, and they're like, I can make this guy a star. That's the type of mindset that a lot of these coaches have. And I think that that's what Florida Gators fans have to realize, when they see him go ultimately in probably the third or fourth round. I think, when you see him go that high and they're shaking their heads, you have to look at it from the coach's perspective of, this guy has shown the traits. This guy has shown the ability athletically. I think that I can mold him into the player that I want him to be in our system. And I think that that's ultimately what's going to determine where he goes in the draft. I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of teams who will, shake their head at him and say, that shoe game and whatever. I don't think that they're necessarily going to hold that against him the whole time. I don't think that anybody should. But it's one of those things where there are some teams that are going to say no, but there's definitely going to be some teams that are going to say yes.
All right, guys, let's move on and try and get at least a couple more in here as we wrap up this episode. And I put up on Twitter today for Gators Breakdown listeners and followers here on Twitter, biggest sleeper for the Gators in the 2021 NFL Draft. I put Stone Forsythe, Travon Grimes, Marco Wilson, and other as options. Trayvon Grimes with 55% of the vote out of about 1,100 votes there as the biggest sleeper for the Gators in the NFL Draft for this coming up year. Do you guys agree with that? And maybe I shouldn't have put Stone Forsythe in there, but I think just because of the offensive line and kind of that position being overlooked, and just we'll see where he ends up going there. But he is getting some recent love there. But Trayvon Grimes, wide receiver, of course, and I think, look, guys, the reputation for Florida receivers and what we saw in last year's NFL Draft, the meteoric rise of Kadarius Toney, I really think the reputation of Billy Gonzalez, coach wide receivers, is really going to hit home. He's got the size. He's got the speed. He's a former 5-star recruit. Teams are going to love the athletic ability of Trayvon Grimes. And I think, we could probably agree with a lot of fans here that he might just be the sleeper of the draft for the Gators.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, when I was over at Stadium in Gale, Dan was asking me a lot of really great questions. And I just got to give him that little plug. He was asking me, he's definitely going to be thankful for that plug. He was asking me a bunch of different ways about like guys that were underrated in this class, right? And as I was telling them, it's so hard for me to pick one, right? When there's 16 guys from the roster, like there's going to be a lot of different guys that could go on day 3, maybe go undrafted, or someone, that surprises us and ends up drafted when we thought they'd go undrafted. There's a lot of different opportunities for guys here based on the way that they fit with teams. Trayvon Grimes is one of them. I've seen it in writing, and I've had it described to me as people think that his best is ahead of him. He did not test as well during his pro day as I personally thought he would. But in an average year where pro day 40s aren't hitting a lot of 4.2s and low 4.3s, questionable. Grimes is 4'5" at 6'4", 220 pounds would be a topic of discussion. People would be saying that's good. Like that, generally speaking, you don't see big-bodied receivers move as fast as he did. And the rest of his tests were just below average to average. Some of them were above. But again, like that doesn't factor in the fact that he's 6'4", 220. So when you weigh that, suddenly like all of his results were pretty good. He might fall down the board because of his lack of production as a former 5-star, and that's fine. But there's going to be a vertically based offense that has a role for him, whether he's burning down the field as we've seen him do before. He's got this absurd field speed, whether he's making acrobatic catches. Like there is a role in a vertically based offense for him where he can, like I said, may have better days, at least in terms of production, than what he's had at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think that Trayvon Grimes is a guy who, where, how you were saying to check the tape on Marco Wilson compared to his pro day. I think that the same thing can be said for the opposite reason for Trayvon Grimes. Last year he had 589 yards and 9 touchdowns, 38 receptions in that potent Gators offense that featured, 2 guys that we already talked about going in the first round. It sort of reminds me of the year prior when you had all these guys like Jacob Copeland, Freddie Swain, you had just Tyree Cleveland, all of these guys that were producing, and their numbers didn't necessarily stack up against the top dog wide receivers, but you could definitely see the traits there for those guys to be drafted, and then ultimately they were. So Trayvon Grimes has the production, but he also has the athleticism in terms of his height, weight, all of that sort of stuff, the speed factor. He can make jump balls in the red zone. He's a perfect quarterback friendly weapon to where you want to just have him on the outside jumping over people. I think that he's going to be in that role in the NFL, and I think that he's definitely one of the biggest sleepers in this draft class, especially with a stacked and loaded wide receiver group this year.
All right, guys, let's move on to one more secondary player. Sean Davis, interesting prospect here for the Gators. Hard hitter, doesn't mind putting his head in there on tackles, doesn't mind the physicality of safety play. I think coaches will like that. I think it's kind of hard to judge Florida secondary players and what we saw in 2020.
Yeah.
Why was there the fall of a Marco Wilson, a steady decline of Donovan Steiner from 2018 to 2020, and then Sean Davis, who showed promise in 2019, and another player who didn't live up to what we thought that they could be in 2020. So I do wonder if coaches look at what happened in the Florida secondary as a whole when they are looking at these particular players in the secondary, because Sean Davis, probably out of all those guys in the secondary, showed so much potential and kind of just maybe filtered out. I don't think he had such a terrible season. He didn't have a really bad fall, but I think when you look at it, he didn't live up to the expectation in 2020 that we thought we'd get from him as well.
Yeah, it definitely hurt, like you said, with just the secondary around him. Definitely was not that good. But you look at his 2019 season, like you said, I think he led the team in interceptions, and if not, he was second. I remember, according to Pro Football Focus, in terms of guys that played a meaningful role, at least, like not guys that came in at the end of a couple games, but meaningful roles in the secondary, he allowed far and away the lowest passer rating of any defensive back. I'm talking over C.J. Henderson, Marco, Kyrie when he stepped in and played. Sean Davis had the best production of the bunch in terms of QB rating allowed at that point. QB rating, being for whatever it's worth, but that's a meaningful stat, especially when you are a safety. And he's a bit undersized. Maybe teams will be a little scared off of that, but at the same time, he's really long for a guy that's only 5'10" and a half. He's got an 87th percentile wingspan. And before he got hurt pulling his hammy in that 40, he was testing really well. His broad jump and his vertical jump were both really impressive. The length, again, being there, he looks like, as long as that testing came out well in his runs, and I think we saw it on tape in Florida that he is a pretty fast player, that he can be that rangy type of ball hawking safety at the next level with some more development, getting past whatever the communication errors really were that maybe do mess with his psyche a little bit from the past 2 years at Florida. I don't know. I mean, we saw communication errors aplenty throughout the defense. It's hard to imagine that he'd suddenly be able to just wipe that stuff. I think he's going to need a little bit more mental grooming at the next level because of that. But he's another one of those guys. There's so many guys in this class for Florida that they just have these traits. Maybe they didn't live up to it 100%. Maybe they really exploded in their final year and showed us what they were capable of with these traits. But the majority of this class has something about them, Sean Davis included, that it's okay, you see why they're being taken seriously. You see why this guy might get drafted.
Well, when you talk about rise in terms of the secondary players for Florida or really any SEC team last year, I'm not sure I could tell you, 5 players who really took that big leap. I'm not sure what happened with the SEC last year, but, Zach can vouch for me. Every week when we were doing our podcast, I was just saying, what is going on? Why are all these secondaries so awful? All these defenses so bad? I think that there was a big issue across the board in terms of play defensively. Maybe it was due to COVID. Maybe it was due to other factors, but the play just wasn't there. And I think that Sean Davis was a perfect example. Obviously, he had his flashing moments, but there were times where he just didn't show up enough. And there were also times where you're looking at him as one of the weaknesses of the secondary, but I think that you could say that for almost every player on that secondary besides Kyrie Elam last year. It's interesting. You go back and you look at that Auburn game from 2019, that one-handed interception that he had. I mean, that was, people were looking at that okay, this is something that he can provide. He has that range. He has those ball skills. He's going to be one of those players in 2020 that's going to make that big leap and be amazing, basically. But that didn't turn out to be that way, but I think that you could see the traits were there. And like Zach said, besides, him getting hurt, unfortunately, during that 40-yard dash, you could see that he was about to have a pretty solid pro day. And I think that would have ultimately had him rise up the boards a little bit for those scouts who were having question marks about his athleticism. He did compete in the Senior Bowl, which I think will get him pretty good grades beyond, those fringe guys. I think that it will ultimately get him drafted. And I think that any team that takes him, they're going to be getting at least a solid player who works hard, who's not afraid to get his nose in there. He's going to make sure to get all those big hits that we've seen with the Florida Gators over the recent seasons. And I don't necessarily think that he's going to come in and be a starter, but he can definitely come in, play special teams, get in there as like maybe the third or fourth safety on a team and figure it out from there.
That's something that I really want to quickly hit on. Demetrius, you mentioned the Senior Bowl. Like this year more than others, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that they had some sort of like not medical testing, but they could do some sort of evaluations with these players at the Senior Bowl because coaches were able to interact with players there, unlike really anything else that we've had during this offseason. We missed the combine where players had that time where they could meet with coaches. It was so integral, so crucial to the draft process. The Senior Bowl was the closest thing to that this year with the COVID, like start to finish COVID offseason. Last year being like the halfway through one. The Senior Bowl, where a guy like Sean Davis, where a guy like Trayvon Grimes, these underrated guys in UF's class, Kyle Trask didn't make it there, but he was supposed to be there. But guys like that, that's such a huge event for them this year in terms of getting NFL teams the information that they need. We saw it last year, even though they did have the combine and stuff, like Florida having 3 receivers drafted, Tyree Cleveland snuck in on the last day, and I'm sure being at the Senior Bowl, proving himself as a special teamer in every different situation that they had for special teams there. That's probably why he got drafted. That could be a huge bonus for guys like Grimes, like Davis this year.
Guys, one more before I let you go. Last position grouping here. Look, we've heard for all throughout this NFL draft, not a very deep defensive tackle draft when you look at it. The Gators have 2 guys that will be looked at, Darrell Slayton, Kyrie Campbell. Slayton thought of much higher than Campbell when you start looking at NFL draft prospects. Thing about Slayton, you got to remember, much like Kadarius Toney playing quarterback in high school and playing the wide receiver, Slayton was an offensive lineman in high school and didn't transition to defensive line until he got to Florida. So still plenty of experience to garner there for Slayton. But where do you see those guys, if at all, fitting in for NFL teams? And we'll wrap it up after that.
I think that Slayton's going to be an interesting guy for a team to draft. Obviously, he's a huge body. I think he was around 350 pounds at one point during last year. He's going to be a guy that's going to basically play your nose tackle. I think that he can take arm blocks pretty well. I don't necessarily see him as a high-profile player, obviously, but a late-round, flyer. I could see a team definitely taking a shot at him. Kyrie Campbell, I'll be honest, he really disappointed me in that pro day. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the stats, but they just were not up to par, not anything that I would have ever expected from a guy who was only 284 pounds. I think that alone for me as a scout in the NFL, I would have to take him off my board. I mean, it's just, it was that bad. And I'm not trying to disparage him at all. I'm just saying that it's one of those things where you look at that and you look at his production and look at the body of work. And I just don't think it matched up. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands if he does get drafted. But for now, I think that would be, a late round undrafted kind of player.
And that's the curious case about Kyrie Campbell, right? Is like he had, again, I'm not trying to disparage him either. He had really miserable pro day testing. The production in Florida wasn't really there, but Todd Grantham was his biggest fan last year.
Yeah.
And Florida's defense, I would never really argue got good last year. But I would go to bat and say that it got better every week that Kyrie Campbell was on the defensive line.
Absolutely.
It seemed like it got better and there was some more structure. So was it truly that Kyrie is just like a genius? Like he is a guy you need on your defensive line because he understands all the techniques and the knowledge and he knows where guys need to be. Maybe that's truly what it is, and that's really invaluable, that you can put the athleticism aside. Maybe whether it's in the NFL, but certainly on Florida's defensive line, like there is an incredible need for a guy like Kyrie Campbell. But at the NFL, at least in terms of developing into a role, it's hard for me to project that with his results and with his production. TJ Slayton, you mentioned it, Demetrius. He got up to like 350 at one point. David mentioning that he's a former offensive lineman, and now he's a 6'4", 330-pound defensive lineman with absurd explosion. His 10-yard split was crazy. His broad jump was also really, really impressive. those are the type of drills that you want to see a defensive lineman really stand out in. And he did, especially for a guy that's as big as he is. When you start to account for weight and you weigh that in as a 92nd percentile guy in terms of weight, 73rd in height, he's a really, really impressive mover for a dude as big as he is. I don't know if you can necessarily give him a huge role in the NFL because of his size, and I don't think you want to make him lose a ton of weight because he can be a space eater. He can take up double teams. He can really surprisingly create pressure for a player of his stature that, I think an NFL team, if they take him on day 3, they can carve out a consistent 15, 20, 25 snaps a game type of role for him. And he'll consistently be one of the most important players on that defensive line in that role, consistently getting his job done. I think that it's going to take the right team. It's going to take the right defensive line coach to understand what they've got in him and defensive coordinator. But if he finds that pairing, like these teams that are rotating defensive linemen so much more these days and not just relying on 4 or 5 guys, TJ Slayton can fit into a defense like that and create some pressure.
All right. Awesome stuff, guys. Awesome stuff there. Looking at the a lot of these Gators here getting ready for the NFL draft. There's a few others we could hit on as well, but we got time limits here. So as I said, and we got the all access coming up here too for the Gators. I know we'll all catch an eye on that as well. So guys, thank you so much for joining me this week. Zach, Demetrius, what you guys got coming up for all your people who read all your articles and all the everywhere else you'll be this week, because I know it's a busy week for you guys, crossing paths with the NFL and college football talk. So what you guys got going on this week?
We've got a lot at All Gators. I'm telling you, we'll have stuff for every pick, immediate recap. We're going to do stuff on like these guys fits with their pro team. It should be a really fun time. So obviously all Gator fans listening to this, you're going to want to check that out. If you're a Buccaneers fan, I'll have Buccaneers content as well. If you're a Jaguars fan, I know Demetrius will have a lot of content because he's got 5 picks to talk about in the first 2 days of the draft alone.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. But just all of what Zach said, obviously on allgators.com, we have plenty to talk about, plenty on every single draft prospect. If you're not even a Gators fan, you're going to want to go there if your team does pick a Florida Gator. And then obviously me at bigcatcountry.com, I have a bunch of Jaguars content coming out. I'm going to have a mock draft coming out. I'll be there for the draft on Thursday, probably Friday and Saturday too, because they're finally allowing media back in. It's going to be interesting to do that. But yeah, we just have a bunch of draft stuff, and I hope you guys enjoy the draft on Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
All right, everybody, go give those guys a follow. Go read their content at SI All Gators. Really, really good stuff there, especially getting ready for the 2021 NFL Draft. Demetrius, Zach, thank you guys so much. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.